Welcome to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Come with us as we connect the pro-life movement's past to present, uncover hidden or forgotten history, and its connections to the battle still raging today. Now, here's our host, Danielle Underwood.
I am excited to kick off a brand new podcast series today, where we're going to dive into the rich and storied history of the pro-life battle in Kansas and nationally, and tie it directly to today's current events. So many stories to tell, and so much the corporate media has hidden from view. So we decided if we didn't tell you these stories, who will? So to help me set the stage for this series and give us a primer on the threads that we're going to be weaving through these upcoming episodes, I've invited Jack Cashel to come and sit with me here in the studio today and to really guide us through this conversation. There's so much history here. And I just want to say welcome. Thank you for being here.
Danielle, thanks for having me. And I really admire the work you guys are doing, and I hope you keep it up, and I hope you succeed.
Thank you so much. We're in it together.
Yeah.
Jack is an independent writer and producer. He is the author of 14 nonfiction books. He has produced over 20 documentaries, and he's a prolific writer for all kinds of newspapers and magazines. Many of them you've heard of. Some of them you probably read. And he also has a PhD from Purdue University, so back in West Lafayette, Indiana.
That's correct.
And he's been a university-level teacher, so a professor in American Studies. So welcome. I'm so glad to have you. I cannot think of anyone who is a better storyteller than you. You are masterful. You've got a library in your head, and you have a gift for this. So I'm very grateful to have you here.
Danielle, and I'm pleased to be here, and I'm particularly pleased to be working with Kansans for Life because of all the pro-life organizations in all the states in America, I think your organization has a responsibility that other people don't have, given the history of Kansas. And there's many people who don't know the history of Kansas. Many school kids in Kansas don't know the history of anything, let alone Kansas.
How true.
But it's the one state in America that was built around a specific idea. And that idea was freedom. And in fact, I was thinking about this. If the abolitionist movement in the early part of the 19th century had called itself the pro-freedom movement rather than the abolition movement, it's as the pro-life movement versus the anti-abortion movement. Pro-life works because it's positive and it's energetic. But it was the pro-freedom state. And just a little quick background. 1854, Kansas-Nebraska Act is passed, which opens up the Kansas territories to immigrants from outside that area. And with the premise that there would be popular sovereignty. So whoever controlled the population controlled the destiny. Would it be a pro-slavery state, or it would be a state that abolished slavery? That was the issue at the time. And in fact, I remember reading editorials where they're condemning abolitionists as captives of a single idea, right? Well, that's a major idea.
It's a major idea.
I mean, the whole country is about ready to be torn apart around this idea. So what happened is that, thousands of people from New England and Ohio and New York State pulled up stakes, abandoned everything, and moved to Kansas in the 1850s, which was no easy thing to do. It was difficult, dangerous, expensive, and arduous just to establish this state as a free state. I had no other real motive. I mean, who moves to Kansas? Or any other motive. You need a real motive to come to Kansas. Not offense to Kansas,
yeah.
But
You might be from New York or New Jersey.
You don't go for the beaches.
Right.
You don't go for the mountains.
This is true.
So you come for an idea, and they did. And at the same time, of course, the Democrats who control Missouri with the slavery state would come across the border, sneak across, and have these various elections. Anyhow, they went back and forth. It's called Bloody Kansas. It was a very difficult period. It was really the proto-Civil War. It really kind of started here in this region. And finally, though, in 1859, they settled on a constitution that Congress approved. And it's called the Wyandotte Constitution. This will come into play 60 years later? No, 60 years later. No, some amount of years later. And the Kansas Constitution is a pro-freedom constitution, that there will be no slavery in the state of Kansas. And it's modeled, of course, on the American, Declaration and the Constitution. It's dedicated to life, liberty, et cetera. What's interesting about it, and I'm just setting this up, we can come back to it, it made a special progressive set aside for females. It recognized something about women that the U.S. Constitution didn't. It said women will have property rights, which was very avant-garde at the time. And it also said women will be able to vote in school board elections. It's not total, enfranchisement, but it's a start.
Ahead of its time.
Right. And so, and then, of course, the Civil War ensues. And Kansas is just a bastion of anti-slavery sentiment. It is the free state. So you have, when you go to the Free State Brewery in Lawrence, there's a history there. People died for that. I mean, by the thousands. And just to clarify, too, for people who are within the abolitionist movement, there was the families that moved out here. They gave up everything. You can't call them, rhino types or moderates. They dedicated their whole lives to freeing Kansas. And then there were the radical hardcore that were beyond the fringe. The most famous of whom was John Brown.
Yes.
And what Brown did was to he and his sons. He had 20 children, and they were nuts, but they were in a sense they were well motivated, I guess. But they went out in the Potawatomi massacre. You probably heard of.
Yes.
They killed just 5 with broadswords, 5 Southern sympathizers. They weren't even slave owners. So there is a fringe element that's always been in all movements, that even though they're fighting on the right side of the cause, their means and their methods are inexcusable. There's no way to excuse what John Brown did. He would later be engaged in a kind of a mini rebellion in Harper's Ferry that led to the Civil War in many ways. That was, in a sense, more morally justifiable, but it was politically wildly impractical and, again, led to many unnecessary deaths.
So sometimes the cause is right, but the methods might not be.
That's right. And when you look at the history of Kansas, where you have people who gave up everything to move here, you can't call them moderates. I'm sorry, that word doesn't work, right? They were totally dedicated to the cause, but they wanted to do it in a way that would work. I mean, the abolitionist forces prevailed. It cost 600,000 lives. I mean, it wasn't easy, and it was never going to be easy. But Kansas was admitted to the Union. And that is the legacy that I think Kansans for Life begins with, because you have a legacy, a commitment to freedom, a commitment to women's rights that other states don't have.
Yes, yep. And protection for life, right? The lives of those, the African Americans who would come here.
Right.
And, that they would not have their lives and their freedom taken from them. Absolutely. We have a beautiful history here in our state. And I think that, that also ties in really well. The pro-life movement really embraced the nonviolent action of the commitment to working within the civil system and working through the legislative system that we had to try to protect the lives of the unborn and also those who are aging and those who are medically fragile. That's the legacy that we ended up taking and using for our pro-life movement. And we have maintained that absolute commitment to work within that moral framework, that we are not going to be the ones who go out and use lies or use any kind of violence or any kind of action like that. We have always stood on the side of nonviolent action and working through the legal system and through good grassroots effort, right?
That's right.
Organizing the people.
Right. And, in a sense, it's, when I first moved here, I grew up in New Jersey. And when I first moved here, I would say my political leanings are libertarian. Growing up in the late 60s and whatnot, it was self-indulgent and all the, it was rock and roll, sex, whatever. So I didn't think about the pro-life movement at all. I didn't identify at all as pro-life. However, I kept, I remember having this discussion with my friends in graduate school who were totally all in for abortion, et cetera. This is post-Roe v. Wade, et cetera. And I said, here's what bothers me. As a libertarian, I said, yeah, sure, do what you want to do. But boy, I had to say this, the pro-life side has the moral high ground in this issue, right? And I was like I alienated them all, like they were going to abandon me just for saying that.
Wow.
I said, hey, I'm on your side, but let's just be realistic here. They have the moral high ground. There is no morally defensible way to kill your child. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you can kill your child, and what else can't you do, mm-hmm. right? And I said, well, as a libertarian, blah, blah, blah. And then as I got more sophisticated understanding of the Constitution, especially the whole notion, Roe v. Wade was so ungrounded in any kind of historical reality that I moved finally. And then when my first child was born, bingo, I'm pro-life. I get it now. I'm sorry for being so dense all that time. And a lot of people have had evolutions like that.
A lot of people do. Yes, they do.
But it was a good timing because here I was in a state. I actually lived across the border in Missouri, but I was totally engaged in Kansas politics, where movement was afoot, where people were beginning to make a difference, beginning to coalesce. Like, was it the Summer of Mercy? Was that it in 93?
Well, let's back up a little bit before that.
Yeah.
So you just brought up Roe versus Wade. So most people know that we just passed the 50-year anniversary of Roe versus Wade. And,
right.
Most everyone knows that Roe versus Wade was overturned this past year. And so that was 50 years ago. Well,
right.
Kansans for Life, the pro-life movement was, active even before Roe versus Wade, but really was kind of getting more and more organized. And then Kansans for Life, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary this year.
Yeah.
So everything, any kind of grassroots movement is going to start very disorganized and then get more and more organized in the way that, people get together and they're able to align the values, and it takes some time for that all to happen. But, the really amazing thing, I love the story of the beginnings of Kansans for Life because it started so grassroots, around kitchen tables and down in church basements, and they held prayer rallies. And it's amazing to me as I look back. They were able to do some really fantastic things even very early on. I read about a 1,500-person prayer rally at one of the abortion facilities here in the Kansas City area. And, state conventions that they brought together. They started forming chapters and they started mounting boycotts. Lots of things that people were very active in this movement. And it got progressively more and more organized as it went. But, the thing about it was for a while, it took a long time where they were able to kill bad bills that were going into the legislature.
Sure, right.
But they were not able to pass any good bills for quite a while. It took quite some time. And so you just brought up Summer of Mercy, and we really see that as being kind of an inflection point within the pro-life movement that first of all, there was a pro-life Democrat governor who was in power, and her name is Joan Finney.
Right.
First woman governor of Kansas, right? And very pro-life.
Yeah, allegedly,
Allegedly,
yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so what happened with that Summer of Mercy is that there was there was a group that was going around and putting together these protests, and they were doing a lot of civil disobedience. It was, a crazy time, but they had intended on doing a 1-week protest in the city of Wichita specifically because of a notorious late-term abortionist there, Dr. George Tiller. You all probably have heard of him before. And it was supposed to be a 1-week nonviolent protest, and it ended up becoming a 6-week protest because just more and more and more people kept coming, and they kept coming from across the country. So,
and I should add, no one goes to Wichita in the summer for any reason other than an ideal, like when they moved here to Kansas
no, we have
100 years
listeners
prior.
in Wichita. You be careful, Jack Cashel.
Maybe in the spring and fall, but not in the summer. I'm sorry. Wichita summers are awful.
Wichita is great. Yeah, but it is hot. You're so right.
Yeah.
But that's a whole story in and of itself.
Sure,
and so hopefully one of these days we'll do a podcast that's specifically talking about the Summer of Mercy, because some of the same people who were, they got their start in the pro-life movement at that place. It launched political careers and just leaders into the pro-life movement. But that there were all kinds of things with that. But essentially what I wanted to say was, if you look at the news media reports of the Summer of Mercy, even from the very first newsletters and news reports that were coming from KFL and, different chapters, there was always complaints about news bias. And so one of the main things that the people in the stands at the culminating rally event, they were shouting at the media in unison, chanting, "Tell the truth."
Right.
Tell the truth. And they said it over and over and over again because they just could not get the message, the pro-life message, through the mainstream corporate media.
They did not want to hear it. And I had a good introduction to that. In 2009, we made a documentary on the March for Life. We were there 2 days after Barack Obama's inauguration. So that was the mood at the time. He was already, when he was at the Mexico thing where they're, they were,
Mexico City policy.
Yeah, right. They'd already thrown that out. And so that was his first order of business, to kowtow to the pro-abortion movement. So I had never been to a March for Life before. It's in January. It commemorates the passage of Roe v. Wade. And we had a 6-camera crew, so we could see the whole thing, from various. We wanted to do a count of how many people came, And we also could do a demographic count of who was there.
Yeah.
And what we did, our final head count was about 350,000 people. The median age was about 25. At least half the students, half the people that were younger than 25, half were probably older. Mm-hmm. So when I'd pick up the paper and read, oh, this is a senescent movement. These people are aging out. There's not going to be any. I said, what? How are you not here? And then I was looking, because when I had seen the media accounts before that, of the March for Life, you'd see 2 sides show up in Washington. And you'd see like 5 women holding signs like, keep abortion legal or something. So I said to my camera crew, I said, find all the pro-abortion protesters you could find. We found fewer than 10.
Wow.
And yet they got equal coverage on the USA Today, right?
Yes.
And they underestimated the amount of people there. They dismissed its political implications. And especially 2 days after Obama's inauguration. And also we picked up, rappers for life, Chinese people. Every possible kind of demographic or cultural or professional subset was represented in this group. They're from many different foreign countries. A lot of them had come from, really far away. And it was underreported, if reported at all. New York Times, Washington Post, don't even bother. You put 350,000 people in the streets in Washington? And I remember talking to the organizer, said, what you have to do next year is have them sit down in the middle of the street and stay there glue themselves to the pavement like the eco freaks do.
Right.
But that's not the nature of that movement. And they knew that it was going to take a lot of, when you're working against the media headwind like that, you really can't afford mistakes.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I'm jumping ahead.
No, that's okay. So just to kind of backtrack just a little bit. So, so those news media,
right,
who we know are so biased against the pro-life movement, they all said, well, it was a failure. This Summer of Mercy was a failure. They didn't get their goal. So, over and done. And really what people fail to realize is that was the inflection point that really connected the pro-life movement within Kansas. I think about 70% of the people who were actually at that, I think it was called the Hope for the Heartland rally,
Right.
were from within Kansas.
Right.
And those connections just got so tight. They were able to really work together. And then, so that was 1991 that happened. So the very next year, finally, a nice large class of pro-life legislators were elected.
Right.
And so where before they'd only been able to kill bad bills,
Yeah.
but they had been effective in doing some different things. So they were gaining traction. But finally, they got that class of legislators to come in who they needed to be able to make some actual legislative progress. And so finally, 1997, our very first pro-life bill we were able to pass. Then that's a woman's right to know.
Right.
And that's in the news a lot right now. It's a whole nother topic, but that shows you just the power of the movement and the unseen forces at play and how that all comes together and creates, what's history now, but it's still playing out even today.
Yeah, that's kind of when I got involved in Kansas politics. It was about that time. I hadn't been paying much attention. By this time, I'm pretty, ardent pro-lifer, and I have some access to the media. And so I started writing about it, and I got involved. I was particularly intrigued by George Tiller, the alleged doctor who was operating out of Wichita. On his website, he boasted of having performed 60,000 late-term abortions, the most in the world. I think he may have been exaggerating, but I'll take him at his word. And part of the 1997 legislation was that to perform a late-term abortion, it limited to two causes. One was the impending death of a female, and the other one was the permanent bodily damage, right? Those are the only two conditions under which you could perform an abortion on a woman after the baby's reached 22 months in the womb. 22 weeks, right? 22 months. So I'm talking elephants here. But so what Tiller had to do was to start getting really involved politically. Because at that time, when I started, I got intrigued with the election of Phil Klein as Attorney General in 2002. Same year that Kathleen Sebelius was elected governor, who was a Democrat and a very active pro-abortion Democrat. And Phil Klein, a very ardent pro-life Republican and willing to put principles into action, legally. And
this was for Attorney General?
Yeah, he was Attorney General. He was elected. The Democrats threw everything they could into it. Tiller was backdooring his money into various PACs because you can't have Tiller money coming directly to you. You've got to filter it through various, back channels. And Klein should have won a runaway in a Republican state, but he wins narrowly. And then he gets to work. And he had a lot of work to do. Kansas, I would tell people this, they look at me like I was crazy. Wichita, Kansas, had become the late-term abortion capital of the world, right?
Yes.
If you're in Rotterdam and you want a late-term abortion, you go to Amsterdam to take a plane to Wichita because you're not getting it in Amsterdam. And that's 90% of the abortions being performed at Tiller's clinic were from out of state. And a great number of them were for late-term abortions. And Klein started getting into this because part of the 1997 legislation was that he had to report, you had to report these late-term abortions and the causes for them. And as Klein began to see that the reporting was shoddy to the point of almost non-existent. One area, for instance, was if the girl was 14 or under, you had to report it to the Child Defense DSE or whatever it is. What Klein discovered right away, and this is something they wanted to conceal, was that of the 166 abortions performed in this 1-2 year period for 14 and unders, only 3 were reported to the authorities.
Oh, my.
So in other words, 163 cases of statutory rape went unreported.
Goodness.
Because every one of them was a victim
Right,
of, unless some vague Romeo and Juliet clause or whatever. But usually the younger the girl, the older the man. That was one thing that he discovered. The other thing he discovered is that that Tiller was essentially making a mockery of the law. So what they were doing was, Tiller was doing this very sketchily, was putting down permanent lasting damage, major and permanent lasting damage to the female. And for each one of those, he had to get a rubber stamp from this other doctor. And then they got into the nature of what that lasting damage was.
Right.
All psychological.
That's what I was going to say. Like emotional damage.
Right.
It was the purported reason.
And then when you look at the individual cases, I wasn't allowed to, but Dr. Paul McHugh, and Harvard-trained psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins, came in to look at the cases. Was afraid I'd miss the rodeo circuit. Didn't want to miss my prom. One that just got my attention, I wouldn't be able to go to the Oingo Boingo concert. And a lot of these girls were being pressured by their mothers or their fathers or their stepfathers or the statutory. They were killing the evidence,
statutory
basically.
rapist.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it was a shambles. It was a disgrace. And yet, as the more traction Klein got, the more desperate Governor Sebelius, Tiller. I mean, Tiller was contributing millions to the Democratic Party by this time. And in 2006, what they did, and they were using, they controlled the courts. They were resisting through the courts. They were resisting every which way, sharing information about statutory rape, sharing information about totally sham statistics. In 2006, they convinced the Republican district attorney of Johnson County to change parties and to run against Klein. And because now he was, the media label for him was Snoop Dogg Klein, because he was only interested in invading the privacy of women. That was the ruse they gave. It was disgraceful. And this is the state that was founded, 60 years earlier on the basis of 150 years earlier, getting my centuries mixed up, of establishing freedom, establishing the life and liberty of every human individual. And here they were, the whole political apparatus and the media apparatus were dedicated now to snuffing out the life of the most vulnerable of Kansas citizens. It was just a travesty. It was a mockery of the whole state legacy.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing history. And so much has been forgotten. And so much, either it hasn't been taught or it's been deliberately hidden over the years, I think, as we, I'm a bit younger than you, not a lot younger.
A couple, 2-3 years, yeah. Well, I think I was in the first grade when you started preschool, if I remember right.
Yeah, but I mean, this is, so much of this is not history that I grew up knowing or hearing about. Roe versus Wade was, was already established before I was born. And
right.
So, but learning this, it's so instrumental to help us understand why we are where we are today.
Right.
Because when we see this, I hesitate to use the word collusion, but the working together of people in government and media to go for a pro-abortion, to push toward a pro-abortion future, pro-abortion policies. It's you feel almost like you can't do anything to overcome that, And
yet you feel like you have to.
And
right.
Absolutely.
And even
yes.
sometimes, it's the effort is with the word Sisyphean, and you can look that one up. Sisyphus was the guy who had to roll the rock uphill, and it always kept rolling back down. And the mythic figure, there's a Sisyphean sense to it sometimes because they just when you think you're accomplishing something, they push you back. In 2010, for instance, we elected a pro-life in Kansas state house, a governor, and a lot of bills started moving through. And this is where we tie back into Kansas history in just an amazing way. In 2019, the Supreme Court of the state of Kansas, which Kansas is a state that always votes Republican in presidential elections and senatorial elections, usually by a comfortable margin, 15, 10 points, 20 points.
But a strangely,
a liberal Supreme Court.
Well, yes, but also I'm talking about the governorship.
That too, right.
We tend to be kind of strangely bipolar a little
on
bit.
that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Bipolar is a good word. And the governor appoints the Supreme Court based on a review process controlled by the Bar Association, totally skewed from the beginning.
Which almost no Kansans know about.
That's right. So you end up in 2019, the Supreme Court with essentially 6 liberals and 1 conservative. And they saw it in their wisdom that in 1859, when the Kansas legislator put together the Wyandotte Constitution, that they had built into that Constitution a woman's right to an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And
an unlimited right to
that's
abortion.
right, an unlimited right to abortion.
Putting it on the same level as freedom to your expression and
property rights,
religion,
voting,
and,
right. And I was just reading their decision, and the Constitution was in many ways, mirrored the Kansas Constitution, the United States Constitution, and the founding documents, a commitment to life, liberty, etc. And they went for liberty. They said, no, it says by liberty here, they mean a woman should have a right to control her own body. That's what they argued. And thus, unlimited right to an abortion. Except, of course, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that that child is not your body. It has its own, his or her own DNA, right?
That's
right. A separate living human being. And so they had to twist the meaning of body, then grant this. This is the same. So you're telling the people of Kansas that, 150 years ago when these people risked everything to come here, they wanted to write into that Constitution a woman's right to kill her child. That is so insane.
Insane.
That when you look at it, you don't know whether to laugh or to cry or to
both.
Or to rewrite the laws of Kansas so that you get a Supreme Court that somehow reflects. I don't care if they reflect the people, just reflect the sane people in the state of Kansas. But that's where we are. And then a couple years later, or 3 years later, I guess, the U.S. Supreme Court says no. In the national and U.S. Constitution, there is no right to abortion. It was a totally bogus. Roe v. Wade was always bogus. They knew it from the beginning. It was based on a lie. Mm-hmm. The Jane Roe, that's a long story, but it was based on a false premise, false case. And that's where we are in Kansas. It's a very difficult environment for KFL to operate in.
It is. It is a very difficult environment because we know that all of those laws that, so with that woman's right to know that was passed in 1997, and we were able to pass more than 20 additional protections.
Right.
A lot of those were all pro-life protections. A lot of those were directly pertaining to abortion. We know that those are now all at risk. So we're really risking returning to that horrific past.
Right.
That we saw play out here so vividly, horridly, with this supposed doctor who was willing to, tear infants in the womb, babies in the womb, limb from limb, for money.
Right.
Up until horrific late term, and I don't know how late he went, but I know that the pro-abortion camp nationally is absolutely coming out, and they're denying this now, but they're saying that they want up to 40 weeks of pregnancy. They want a full 9-month open door policy to be able to abort any baby at any time up until that baby's born.
And, if need be,
possibly afterwards.
Right. As the governor of Virginia so eloquently stated, Governor Northam, ex-Governor Northam, thankfully.
Yes.
And he's a doctor. Well, we make them comfortable. Okay. Yeah, well, that's great.
Yes.
And then we kill them. It's an amazing story. And you wonder how history will be recorded. But I will say this, is that in the first half of the 19th century, abolitionists were treated by the media as shabbily, if not more so, than the pro-life activists are today. They'd have the equivalent of no-knock raids where they come in because you've been standing in front of an abortion clinic like we've been seeing. And it took a long time, and it cost a lot of blood, let's face it, for that movement to be overturned. For their now everyone, the presentists, they call that, when they look back, they say, well, if I was there in 1860, I would have been on the front lines of the anti-slavery movement. Of course. No, you wouldn't have. You'd have been doing just what you're doing today. Craven, cowardly, unthinking, going along with the crowd, afraid that at your next bridge club you're going to voice an opinion that will be shot down by your fellow bridge players. No, there's an obligation, and it's unfortunate that in a state like Kansas or any state, there are so many educated women who are on the wrong side of this issue, the wrong side of history.
Educated people in general.
Yes, yeah.
Women and men.
Yeah, I know.
Because
right.
it's important that we have both women and men speaking up for the rights of these most innocent, most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
You're so right. Well, this has been a really fascinating discussion, and I know we've barely scratched the surface. So we'll have to have you back again to really dig into some of these topics more in depth. But we really appreciate you coming on. I want to just say on behalf of Kansans for Life, thank you, Jack, for coming and sitting with me here to do this launch podcast. And also thank you to our listeners. If you want to stay up to date and informed about pro-life topics and how you can play a part in this long march toward justice, visit kfl.org and sign up to receive our updates. That's kfl.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, now known as X, at Kansans for Life. And as we say goodbye today, never forget, we are on the right side of history. Truth always wins in the end. And we hope you'll join us next time. Thank you.